assholes.
Hi, I'm Sadie Guinness, and I'm going to tell you what the just happened in Umbrella Academy Season 1. And after you watch this, please watch more of our What the videos. Umbrella Academy is a Netflix series based on the graphic novels by Gerard and Gabrielle Ba. It follows an adoptive family of superhero siblings who realize it's up to them to stop the apocalypse after their missing brother Five returns from the future shortly after the death of their father, Sir Reginald Hargreaves. Working against the Academy are Hazel and Cha-Cha, two temporal assassins who are sent by Five's former employer, the Commission, which is an agency that is tasked with protecting the timeline. Things get more complicated for the family, though, when they realize that the actual cause of the apocalypse is their sister Vanya, who they all thought was the only ordinary one in the family.
There's just nothing special about you.
But as it turns out, she actually has such incredible powers that Hargreaves gave her medication as a child to repress it, and then forced her sister Allison to use her ability to make Vanya believe that she was just some plain Jane ordinary girl. Vanya has no idea about any of this until this obsessive fan turned psychotic murderer Leonard, aka Harold Jenkins, comes into her life and helps her rediscover her powers.
You destroyed my life!
But soon, Vanya's powers get completely out of control, and they're really tied to her emotions, and so she's confused and gets really angry at everyone, and then in multiple fits of rage, she accidentally slits her sister Allison's throat. She definitely on purpose kills Leonard, and then she goes out and decides to end the world by playing her violin. And if you're wondering why Vanya and her violin turned white during that final apocalypse scene, it's because in the comics, her character's villain code name is the White Violin. Cue the more you know star. The Umbrella Academy goes to the theater to stop Vanya, and everyone is prepared to use lethal force and murder their sister except for Allison, who survived Vanya's attack but lost the ability to speak. Vanya is absolutely winning this fight, though, until Allison sneaks up behind her and holds a gun to her head. Instead of killing her, Allison fires off a warning shot, which manages to knock Vanya unconscious, and her surge of power, instead of going off into the earth, then goes into the moon. So we think everything's fine until the moon explodes and begins showering the earth with meteors, and it turns out that is the actual apocalypse, and they kind of caused it.
This doesn't have to be the end.
Realizing their mistake, Five decides the best course of action is to travel back in time to fix Vanya. And so he wants to bring his whole family with him, so they all hold hands and try and time jump together. Yeah, I think for sure he's gonna it up. But can Vanya be fixed? We asked the Umbrella Academy cast whether or not they think Vanya could be fixed, and here's what they had to say.
We had 30 years to work on our powers.
And we still got issues.
Yeah, and we still haven't figured it out. So I think she just needs the time to sort herself out and figure out what it is that she can do.
One thing the show does really well is making sure viewers empathize with Vanya, even though she went all supervillain at the end. I think that's because who hasn't felt resentful about being left out or inadequate? I feel all these things, and my parents call me by a name and not a number, and my sister's a cartoonist and not an actual superhero. And so all of this is exactly why Ellen Page doesn't think of Vanya as a villain, even though she did try and blow us all up.
The biggest sort of demon or villain that's been in her life is her childhood that was abusive and shitty. How this ends up manifesting after it's been so repressed, it just comes out as this uncontrollable rage that snaps into complete destruction.
However, when we asked Gerard whether it was even possible for her siblings to fix Vanya, he interestingly said that it would be foolish of them to try and do that. Maybe he means she can't be fixed because Vanya isn't broken. She just needs love and support and time to understand and control her powers. Or maybe he means that she is beyond help and they just need to chuck her in Hotel Oblivion, which is where all the supervillains go in the comics. This is a lot. An even more pressing question, though, is where the hell these people are time traveling to and how this is gonna affect the timeline of everything we just saw. In the 6th episode of the season, Five travels back in time and winds up erasing everything we had just seen, including Luther and Allison's first kiss. So is it possible that now they're gonna travel back in time and wind up erasing everything we just saw in the first season? Maybe, but I think that's highly unlikely. And even if everything we did see was erased, I believe since they all traveled back together, everyone in the Umbrella Academy would still retain their memories of the first season. Or this could be like The Good Place and just reset everything and everyone has amnesia. I should just be a Janet. You are definitely a cheating. So you're like, is this okay? Does everyone hate me? But where are all of these people going? When we asked Gerard Way, showrunner Steve Blackman, and the cast, they all said that they knew the answer to that question, but they could not tell us anything at this time, unfortunately. But I have a guess. Whether or not the whole family makes it there together, or if this is even their first time travel destination in season 2, I feel like at some point next season, we're gonna see them wind up in the 1960s. The comics are set in this alternative history in which JFK was never assassinated because 5 was assigned to take out the president, but that's when he broke his contract with the commission and returned to present day. We do see some of this in the show with 5 at the grassy knoll with his gun, and then him like jumping on back to the Umbrella Academy, but you can hear in the show the report that JFK is dead. However, one of the main plots of Umbrella Academy's second volume, Dallas, is all of these various factions trying to kill or save Kennedy, including 5 actually having to fight himself over Kennedy's life. It's hard to imagine how the show will draw on Dallas without incorporating this whole presidential assassination in some way or another. Of course, there is a chance that season 2 could skip over the whole JFK storyline and dive into some characters from other future installments of the comics, like Perseus, this ruthless CEO who's out for revenge because the Academy imprisoned his father, or Dr. Terminal, who's like the closest they have to an arch nemesis and who's already name-checked in episode 7. So I feel like they have to be teasing that he's going to be coming down the line. It is really hard to predict where the show is going because it is radically different from the comics. The first season of the show was mainly drawn from Apocalypse Suite with some elements of Dallas thrown in, but then also just like a lot of straight up changes. So we're going to break down some of the biggest changes from the comics right now.
Maybe you're not hitting him hard enough.
Hazel and Cha-Cha actually aren't in Apocalypse Suite at all. They were only introduced in Dallas, and they were super different. They're basically just straight up psychopaths. There's no Hazel-Agnes love story. Hazel isn't dissatisfied with his job. There's no big emotional betrayal. We really don't learn anything about them other than they love sugar before they're killed by Klaus. Yeah, they die in Dallas. I'm sorry, Aaron. In the comics, Luther's head is also literally transplanted onto the body of a giant Martian gorilla. I definitely understand why they made that change for the show. I support that change for the show. The biggest change in the comics is pretty much all of Vanya's story. In the comics, she is actually invited to join this orchestra which wants to destroy the world by playing this piece of music called the Apocalypse Suite. Vanya's resentment toward her family eventually drives her to join the orchestra, and then the conductor does all of these crazy experiments on her and pretty much like brainwashes her and forces her to become the White Violin. So then Vanya, aka the White Violin, is doing her thing, trying to destroy the world, when 5 is the one who sneaks up behind her. But he does not fire off a warning shot. He shoots her in the f***ing head. She lives, but she is paralyzed and has amnesia. There's really not a lot we can take from those changes other than like maybe Vanya will be paralyzed and have amnesia next season. I don't know.
I had a bad Twinkie in the apocalypse once.
There are also a lot of really big and really fun differences with 5 in the comics too. The commission actually bound his DNA to the DNA of like the biggest, most notorious serial killers, which is what makes him like such a good murderer, apparently. But the craziest difference is that instead of his boss being sexy Kate Walsh, it is actually a goldfish with genius intellect and the ability to talk, who has like a fishbowl head on top of a human body. And at one point, to get his revenge, 5 literally eats the goldfish, and it is super f***ed up and amazing. The first season definitely left a lot of big things up in the air, so I'm gonna try and address some of the biggest burning questions.
I can't leave you.
What is Hargreaves and where the hell did he come from? We did get some glimpses of his origins in those flashbacks, but that just raised way more questions than it gave us answers. In the comics, he is actually an extraterrestrial with a magic monocle that allows you to see the truth about someone. When we talked to showrunner Steve Blackman, he said that we are going to learn more about Hargreaves in later seasons and did confirm that those were spaceships shooting up off the ground. So I really think it's safe to say that Hargreaves is still going to be an alien in the show. Another super confusing scene in the show sparked the question of whether or not Klaus actually met God. In the series, he hits his head at that rave and seemingly dies and is transported to this alternate world where he meets a young girl on a bike who seemingly created everything and knows everything and everyone.
To be blunt, I don't really like you all that much.
So is that God, and what the hell does that scene mean? Here's what Robert Sheehan had to say.
That scene was a direct homage to the graphic novel, because Klaus dies in the graphic novel and he meets God in a meadow. And in the graphic novel, God is a sort of a big, tough-looking cowboy with a big mustache.
If you're still confused about that scene, do not worry about it. Steve Blackman said that even the writer's room couldn't come to like a consensus on whether or not that was God. But I think it was God. Have we even begun to see everything that Klaus is capable of? Throughout this season, we saw him get much more in control of his powers, and he's able to make Ben corporeal enough to interact with our world and actually kill all of those assassins with his octopus arms. And in the comics, he's able to actually stop all of the meteors from coming to Earth through telekinetic abilities, and he can possess people as long as he's barefoot, which is like insane. Also, are Allison and Luther incest? Like, is it okay to root for them as a couple?
Hey, don't say that.
They were raised together as siblings since they were infants, and saying that it's not incest just because they don't share DNA is not okay. Just ask anyone who's adopted or has a blended family.
Turn off that cynical brain of yours.
That being said, I do kind of like them together. And like, I know it's up, but like the cast and creative team also really root for them, and they don't find their relationship to be incesty at all.
What it is for me is that you can't fundamentally stop two people that have that connection falling for each other in that way.
The seeds are planted well enough in the show that you see they were more interested in each other, less brother and sisterly, and more of like crush. I think the second they were teenagers and kind of had this like, it wasn't like, oh, that's weird that I feel this way about my brother. It's like, oh, this is this other kid my age that I grew up with and spent so much time with, and we do this thing, and there's like feelings inside, and then they were ripped apart before they could actually figure out what that was.
Yeah. It's so much more than like any kind of sexual attraction.
Yeah.
In that kind of, like you said, like an incesty way.
It's an understanding.
There's a deep understanding and a love for each other that is far deeper than like a physical attraction.
Mm-hmm.
The way I like justify liking them as a couple to myself, at least, is that while they do consider themselves family, they weren't raised in like a normal family environment, and they were definitely raised more as like schoolmates, or, you know, as though they were like at the same orphanage or boarding school or, you know, training facility for superheroes. They definitely consider themselves to be siblings, and that's the wall I keep hitting. Also, is Allison gonna get her voice back? I'm gonna bet yes. In the comics, Allison does get her voice back, but it comes at a huge cost, and it's not a decision that all of her siblings agree with. The commission operates on Allison, gives her her voice back. She takes the place of Jackie O in the car with JFK, and then says, I heard a rumor that like the back of your head is gonna explode, and then like JFK dies, she assassinates the president, and that was the deal for getting her voice back. She decides to do this not because she wants to get her voice back, but because the commission says, if you don't do this, we're gonna go back in time and kill the mother of one of the babies who were like born on that day. Turns out that mother was carrying twins, Five and Luther. They're brothers. Let us know what storylines from the comics you want to see in season 2 in the comments below.